Hello and welcome to the Book Club Review. I'm Kate.
I'm Laura.
And this is the podcast about book clubs and the books that get you talking. Today, we're joined by Elizabeth Morris, whose background in bookselling, publishing and literary events may or may not have prepared her for the arrival of her first child. We'll find out. Now, with a thriving 2-year-old, Elizabeth recently launched Crib Notes, a monthly newsletter featuring succinct book reviews for new and busy mothers. Elizabeth, welcome.
Hi, thank you for having me.
We are also joined by one other special guest.
Very special guest.
Very special guest. Well, actually, a recurring guest, although she's much older now.
She's a friend of the pod.
A friend of the pod. My daughter Rose is hanging out in my arms right now, staring up at my face on the microphone. She may make some noise. She may not. Who knows? But we thought, in honour of Crib Notes and the theme of new and busy mothers, we'd bring Rose onto the show.
Perfect.
Yeah, because this is motherhood, folks. You just have to try and figure out how to do things with them, without them.
As my yoga instructor says, she's always like, they are our teachers. They teach us to embrace the chaos. It's good. Anyways, so Elizabeth, your first newsletter, Crib Notes, landed in my inbox on 19th of December last year when my daughter was just 2 months old. And it was the perfect timing. I was just starting to read again after kind of 2 months of Googling baby conditions nonstop, finally getting back to myself and my reading habits. And there was Crib Notes. I subscribed on Tiny Letter and there it was in my inbox. And as most things did at the time and still do, it nearly brought tears to my eyes. Your introduction, talking about what it's like to be a mother and a reader. We thought you might open the show by reading that.
That's really great to hear that it resonated so much with you because it was such a personal thing to write. What I wrote was, before the birth of my son, books were the love of my life. Since becoming a mother, reading has become more essential than ever to my sense of self. It helps me feel tethered to the woman I was before I had a baby. With it, motherhood has brought an onslaught of visceral new emotions, and these have coloured my reading habits. In the early days, I sometimes felt so vividly alive that I sought writing to match this mental incandescence. At other times, exhausted from rocking a baby who cried endlessly, I craved comfort. Sometimes I wanted books which dug deep into motherhood and held it up to the light. Sometimes I wanted escape. I was also newly impatient when it came to choosing my reading matter. Those slivers of time I had to myself were so precious, I could not waste them on books I wasn't enjoying. Crib Notes is inspired by a year of reading on borrowed time, during night feeds and nap times, during rare hour-long stretches, and, more often, in greedy snatches, whilst my son surreptitiously slides his dinner onto the kitchen floor.
There's so much in there that resonated with me, except for the mental incandescence. I want some of that.
Oh my gosh, yeah. It was quite funny. When I look back, I find it kind of mad. And I think that everyone's experience is so different. And that's why I started Crib Notes, because everyone's in different places. And one of the big things for me is finding a book that suits where you are mentally, so that when you're reading, you can just pick up your book and go, and it's the right book for you. But I remember having weeks when I was up at night reading Sarah Moss's books. I read all of her books and I just felt so mentally exhilarated. It was really odd. And my son I would be breastfeeding him and then be really disappointed when he fell asleep because I'd be like, no, I just want to keep reading this book. How dare you?
Gosh, at 2 a.m.
It was a strange time. But I think the beginning of motherhood is so strange. It's kind of otherworldly in the way that it's different from everything that goes before it and afterwards.
And you're very cocooned against the world, aren't you?
Yes, it's so immersive.
Mm.
What I love about Crib Notes, and you gesture towards this and saying that there's something for every mood, is the format. So that you have the 2 a.m. read in there, as well as the best friend read and a few others.
Yeah, my husband actually came up with the idea of the 2 a.m. read. He's not the most creative person, so it was kind of amazing. And then I thought, actually, yes, this really works with the idea of having different things for different moods. That was really important to me.
You're obviously someone for whom books and reading is a big part of your life and has been in your career up till now.
Yeah.
So what led you to start Crib Notes? What made you make that little leap to sending out a newsletter?
I can actually remember conceiving of the idea. I was breastfeeding my son and I was just thinking about books. I had handed in my notice at my job, which was programming literary events or Waterstones. As soon as he was born, it was just clear to me that I didn't want to go back to work, that I just wanted to be with him, and that my job wasn't really compatible. And it was a funny decision to come to in many ways, because throughout my 20s, I had never ever thought that that would be something I would do. It was very much the right decision, but it took me a while to come to terms with it, because I'd really just spent my life throwing myself into the world of books, and that had been a passion that had just consumed me every single day. I was definitely guilty of not having a very good work-life balance at all and working so hard all the time. So I knew that I needed to do something with that energy. I've always just loved recommending books. At first I thought, oh, this is just a bit of a guilty pleasure. It's a convenient overlap of things in my life, reading and having a baby. It's just something to pass the time. And then I was really overwhelmed by the response. And it seemed that women were really into this idea. And I actually found that very, very moving.
I think it can be very isolating at the same time. You know, we've talked about it being in some ways a cocoon, but at the same time, sometimes you can feel very alone. And even though in many ways it's quite a generalized experience, you know, all women who have children are going to go through it, but at the same time when you're in it, it's like it's so specific to you and it's your whole world. And books and reading, I think, can be a real lifeline out of that. But at the same time, when you're so tired and so caught up in this all-encompassing thing, it's really hard to find that little bit of mental energy to reach out and find those books. And for me, I thought that was what was so wonderful about it. It's offering you something. It's saying, I know you're knackered, but look, this book might be perfect. You know, what do you think?
I try and recommend things that are real kind of all-rounders mainly, that make you feel like you still have your finger on the pulse. They're also really readable but intelligent. I think there's a really big misconception that all your creative and mental energy totally shuts down when you're a mother, and that's not true. Sometimes you do want something that's just like a warm fuzzy blanket to read, but also sometimes you do need just a little spark of stimulation to remind you who you are beyond being a mother. A lot of things I recommend have the whole package of things that you might need. Something I recommended recently was Such a Fun Age by Kiley, Reid. I don't know if either of you have read it yet.
I have not, but I know about it from Crib Notes.
Yes, it's been quite a big book recently. That's a great book. And Bernadine Evaristo's Girl, Woman, Other, which won the Booker Prize. It was a very charismatic book that felt like very good company.
So what would you say makes for a good read when you're a new mother, or indeed just a mother?
I think it's interesting because one of the things that I wanted to do was not to assume that because people are mothers, they should be reading a certain kind of thing. I think there's a big misconception that women who are mothers, they just want to read mindless books. One thing that has been really important to me is reading something for the mood that I'm in. If I'm really tired or if I just need something that feels comforting, or often I have really craved, really kind of hungered for writing that validates and acknowledges my experience as a mother. So I do recommend a lot of books that are about motherhood and really seem to reflect things that I've experienced. But I also often just want to recommend things that are an escape, and I try and really keep it balanced. And I also try and think of practical things as well, like a book that's light enough to pick up.
For me, that was when the Kindle really came into its own.
Yes.
Because you could be lying on your side feeding and you just needed like 2 fingers and a thumb just to flip the page.
Well, not even the Kindle, but for me, the Kindle app, because I had my phone glued to me ever since she was born. I had to get a new phone, you know, a more powerful phone with a longer battery.
Yeah.
But now I just read on my phone all the time because it's always handy.
I can believe it.
So for me, interestingly, I haven't wanted to read about motherhood at all since
That's
becoming
really
a mother.
interesting.
And actually, any books that have kind of talked about that experience, I think it's just too soon. So it just makes me feel a bit raw and I go, woo, and retreat. But of course, that's what's great about your recommendations, as you say, is that there's something there for everyone. You recommend Michelle Obama's memoir.
Yes.
Which I listened to on audio in the very, very early days of Rose's life. So there was quite a lot of listening to it in the wee hours of the morning. Funnily enough, my key takeaway from that book was not, you know, her incredible journey and how impressive she is.
No.
It was her working out.
Yes.
At 5 a.m. She's like, I needed to do something for myself. So my mother would come around at 4 a.m. to be with the girls while they slept. I'd go to the gym from 5 to 6 a.m. And my brain just exploded. I was like, is that what I'm going to have to do?
Oh my
to
gosh.
be able to... I don't think so.
No. They do work out a lot in that book, don't they?
They're quite sporty people, I think. Yeah, and maybe, well, I wouldn't want to say Kate's quite sporty. You might be too. But
I'm not
as
sporty.
we're readers. So.
Yeah.
Well, only because this time around, so I have 3 children. My third is just coming up to 2 now. And this time around, I discovered something that I hadn't figured out with the other two, which is the creche at my local gym, which is fantastic. And I heard about this, you know, and I'd seen other mothers going off to this creche with their babies. And so this time around, which, as with many things, I was like, this time I'm really going to nail it. I'm going to get it right this time. So I started taking her to the gym and bringing her into the creche. But the downside of this is that you kind of have to do a class, you know, once you're there.
Yeah.
So it's just been this kind of extraordinary physical transformation, because I've gone from, you know, just a reasonably average schlubby, you know, woman to like now I'm unbelievably toned and fit, and I could probably run a marathon because of these classes. But it's like, that's not really ever been my agenda. My agenda has always been the creche.
Well, and actually you have managed to squeeze books into your gym experience.
So the best thing about my gym experience that I love so much is there's a spa pool. And when I first discovered the spa pool, I used to just go down there and do what everybody else seems to do, which is just to sit there and stare blankly into space while you kind of recover from whatever horrendous thing you've just been doing on the gym floor. And then I thought, well, yeah, this is not really a good use of my time. I should take a book. And so I started taking in books. I take my Kindle. I go in there. I sit. I usually manage to squeeze in half an hour before I have to race upstairs and pick her up. It's just bliss. I get so much reading done. And
That's
I can't understand why everyone doesn't do it. It's crazy. Like, you know, it's the best thing in the world.
These are the top tips of motherhood, I think.
Yeah.
But so on that subject, do you have some tips and suggestions for ways of fitting in reading, you know, this sense of borrowed time and stolen moments?
I think really prioritising it. My mum said to me when I first had William, she said, when he's asleep, don't worry about doing housework, just leave it. You can probably just do it with him in the sling. You need to make time for you. And so I just religiously have stuck to that. And now he's a bit older, I often am working when he's napping, but on the days where I'm not working, and I've been doing this since the beginning, I just run downstairs, pick up my book, make a coffee or whatever. And that's what I'm doing. And I think in a way, because I know that's the only time I have, it means that I'm a much less distracted reader. So I'm not like, oh, well, I've read a sentence and I better tweet about that now. I'm much more focused. And I do think motherhood makes people more efficient in a lot of ways. And then I guess just the practicalities, Kindles, phones, if you can read with one of those, reading a book that's lightweight enough to carry around so you can just whip it out. That's one of my top tips, really.
You also have the very brilliant only got time to scroll section.
Oh, yes.
So even if you don't have time for a book, you direct people to different articles, really.
I did think that a lot of the time, if I didn't have a book near me, I'd just end up scrolling through Instagram. And it's kind of, if you do too much of that, it's a bit like junk food. You kind of have loads of it and it's really moreish, but you come away just thinking, what have I done with my time? I do quite enjoy the long read. I was just reading one yesterday that was on the cut, and it was about the millennial aesthetic. So kind of dusky pink and pot plants and where that's come from. And I found it just this incredible absorbing read. I was reading it whilst I was putting William to sleep. I think sometimes a little moment like that can lift your day from thinking, what have I really done with my time apart from put a baby to bed?
Multiple times.
Yeah.
You do also hold literary events, which is brilliant, so that now you have a bit more time to yourself. You can get back to what you were working on before. Coming up, you're interviewing journalist and mother of five.
I know.
Clover Stroud, who has written a memoir called My Wild and Sleepless Nights. Tell us a bit more about that book.
Oh, this book is just wonderful. So, as you say, she's a mother of five. She's a Guardian journalist. She's also written a book called The Wild Other. And it's this really profound book about the experience of the first year in her youngest child's life, which occurs at the same time as her oldest child is going through the challenges of adolescence. The thing is, it just really foregrounds domestic life in a way that I think a lot of writers feel afraid to do, because we're told over and over again, women's lives, domestic life, the home, child rearing, it's not interesting, it's not worth literary merit. And she does it in a way that's so poetic and compelling. And between like children eating digestive biscuits and having conversations with her teenagers and building train tracks with toddlers, there are these heart-stopping moments where she talks about the wildness of her feelings being a mother, euphorically loving her children, but also feeling overwhelmingly lonely. The thing I found profound about this book was I hadn't really seen that kind of violence of emotion elsewhere. I mean, I've only just started reading about motherhood, and I'm sure there's a lot more that I still need to read. But I just thought she so spectacularly portrayed all of that, and so frankly and so unashamedly. And I think that society doesn't want mothers to be too much. It wants them to be, she writes, hygienic, good at craft, really pristine, wearing pastel colours, wearing Breton stripes. And it's a real antidote to Instagram motherhood in that way. It's a very blood and guts account. I think that for anyone who does want to read about motherhood, it makes you feel understood reading that book. It makes you feel acknowledged in your experience. And, oh yes, there are other mothers out there who have this real kind of crazy violence of love that I think when you first have a child, it's kind of a shock how strongly you feel about them. I just thought it was such an incredible portrait of that.
It's a really amazing time. It's a really special time. I think there's a reason people have more than one child, because on paper, if you wrote it all down, what you're going to be going through, you wouldn't think, oh, I want to do that. But actually, the experience is so incredible. It's just like nothing else in the world, really. But at the same time, it can be quite difficult.
Yeah.
And I think maybe there's a sense sometimes, am I doing it right? Like everything sometimes can just be so terrible, really just beyond anything you would ever have believed in terms of how badly things can go sometimes and the situations that you end up in. Is there kind of wisdom out there? Are there any books that you found consoling or wise in that way that have helped you process those sorts of things?
Actually, the one book I'd really recommend for this is Sinead Gleason's wonderful book, Constellations. It's a book of essays, but it's sort of more kind of genre blurring than that. It's memoir through essays. All the essays are linked. And so she is this fantastic Irish writer. She's also edited numerous anthologies of Irish women's writing. She's recently actually won the Irish Book Award for non-fiction for this book. She has spent a lot of her life being incredibly ill. So in her early 30s, she had leukemia, and then she thought she'd never be able to have children, but she had children after that miraculously. And she also, I think it's monoarticular arthritis in her teens. And she has kind of spent her life with her body sabotaging her. And so this collection of essays, it meditates on the experience of having a body, and particularly a female body. And she thinks about mortality. She thinks about motherhood. There's something very, very comforting about this book somehow. She's so perceptive and her writing is so luminous that it felt very wise to me. And I remember I read it during a period in November when William just was not sleeping. He was just waking for hours at night and wanting to play. And so I read a lot of this book when I was very tired. The beauty of the writing cut through the tired fog I was in and just made me feel really uplifted and recharged. It was just what I needed. And it is a book, I think, about acceptance in so many ways. Accepting mortality, accepting bodily experience, and accepting the harder parts and easier parts of motherhood. And it's just wonderful.
That sounds great. Have you read I Am by Maggie O'Farrell?
I haven't read it. I've never read Maggie O'Farrell.
It's so good. I thought it was the most extraordinary book. But it's an interesting one because one of the things you do also is you flag up sometimes when people might find something a bit overwhelming.
Yes.
Often it is a kind of a heightened emotional state that you're in a lot of the time. And sometimes things that I think perhaps ordinarily you would have been able to read without a blink can really sear into your soul in a way that can be actually a bit distressing. And one of the things I thought was very clever was the way that you're giving people the option of just saying, this is extraordinary, this book, for these reasons, but here's why you might find it a bit much. Be careful, kind of thing.
Yes, it comes back to that thing of not wanting to assume that mothers have to read a certain kind of book and that they can't take certain subjects. But also, I have found that I'm much more sensitive. And I also think that tiredness makes us all emotionally vulnerable, and mothers are tired a lot of the time. And a recent example is Jenny Offill's new book, Weather, which is wonderful because Jenny Offill is a brilliant, brilliant writer, and she does things that few other writers, I think, really achieve on the page. But her book is really about the rise of Trump's politics and about the escalating climate crisis. And the main character, this woman who lives with her husband and her child in New York, she really gets drawn into this kind of gloomy doomer culture. And I read it and it was such a good book. And I felt really bleak. I felt so bleak after I read it. And I was meeting someone for lunch and I just finished it on the train. And I was like, wow, I just feel terrible after reading this. And the thing is, it's a wonderful book. So I just want to give people the choice and say, she does this so well. But if you're in a place where you're not really feeling emotionally robust, maybe save this. Maybe save it for a week where your child's doing really good sleep. Save it for a time where you're feeling, actually, I really want to engage with these things. Because I think that mothers do want to engage with the climate crisis. And I think that, again, it's a misconception that mothers aren't political. I think because we have children, we're so political. And so sometimes we do want to show up and engage with that material, but also not always.
Yeah, I just finished it actually, and I agree with everything you said. I thought it was extraordinary, but it's true. It's a hard subject.
It is.
And I think because the mother in that book, one of the preoccupations that she just can't ever escape and she keeps coming back to and back to is about her son and and his future, and what can she do when she knows that in 30 years everything is possibly going to be completely unsustainable for people, you know, and how do you process that kind of Yes, Rose.
Yes, Rose.
How do you process that kind of fear and that terror and also that inability to have any individual effect on the way things are going? She's such a beautiful writer. I loved her earlier book, Department of Speculation, so much. And this has all that wonderful quality in the writing. But it's this very difficult, and I actually thought it was great testament to her that she got me to read a book about that subject, which normally I would have run a mile from because it's just all so terrible. I don't need to read more things to make me feel even worse about it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I completely agree.
But yeah, no, that's so. Yes, exactly. It's recommended, but with a slight mental health warning.
One book actually that does that really well is Nell Frizzle's book, The Panic Years, which comes out in May, and it's basically about her path to motherhood and moving from being 28 years old and single and knowing that she wanted a child and kind of how she got there. And she goes through the steps of the different things you have to think about actually when you're like kind of contraception, miscarriage, and actually the environment. And she really weighs up, how do you have a child when we have this environmental crisis upon us? It's a really smart book. It's really, I felt kind of moved and privileged to have read it. I felt so emotional after I read it. I was reading it in the bath and I just felt so in awe of the fact that she'd put down this personal experience, all of these intimate things. I just felt so moved by the fact that she put this down on the page for everyone to read and to help women move through all those different junctures and questions around having a child. So that is a book that brings in those questions about the environment and children in a way that is really thorough and helpful. And it's also just a really warm, funny, generous-spirited book.
You recommend Nell Frizzle's column in Vogue in Crib Notes, and I read a few of those over as soon as your email arrived in my inbox, and those are very funny.
Oh, I just bloody love her. I'm a bit obsessed with her. I keep tweeting about everything she does, and I think she might think it's a bit weird. But her writing is so good. She's really genuinely hilarious and also a great journalist.
One of the things that was a surprise for me becoming a mother was, it's coming back to your point about the domestic and how we overlook the domestic and we undervalue the domestic. And I would say I'm super guilty of that, partially because I'm not a very domestic person. So being at home with my baby all the time is a huge change. And, you know, when I was a younger, mobile, child-free Londoner, you know, you kind of look at these women in cafes with the buggies, and the buggies are big and they're in the way, and you're like, I'm very busy.
Oh my God, I know.
I'm very busy and I'm very important, and why are they in my way? And then, of course, you become one of these people and you realize that actually, for me, this was the biggest shock. 6 months ago, they were you. And it sounds really naive to think about, but it's like you've gone through a portal into another dimension. And I'm only 5 months in, so hopefully you somewhat come back out of the portal and are able to have more of your old life. But I think that's what's so brilliant about what you're doing here, is that you're managing to say to people, look, you are now a mother, but you can still read. Because so many people I hear are like, oh, I don't have any time to read. People say that all the time anyways. And whenever they do, I'm like, well, then, you know, are you a reader? Because if you're a reader, you will really try to find the time, won't you?
I think so. And I also think my main hot tip is actually just read the book you want to be reading.
Yes.
And so many people don't do this, and they feel like they have to. And I actually think people who are outside of the book world often feel like, oh, this is the big book of the moment, I have to be reading this. I gave up quite a few prize shortlisted and longlisted books last year, and I don't feel guilty about it. I just think that if you're enjoying a book, you will read it. And if not, give it up. Life's too short.
I like this advice very much.
I'm reading Neverwhere by Neil Gaiman.
Oh, yes.
And when I started it, I was like, oh, this is just, the characters aren't really developed. It's just, sort of a bit annoying. It's so good. I'm loving it so much. It's such a page turner. I don't care that the characters aren't developed. I just want to know what happens next.
Well, Elizabeth, thank you so much for writing Crib Notes. As I say, it was really important when it landed in my inbox, and I do look forward to it. I should also say I've sent the link to my WhatsApp. The inevitable and much loved WhatsApp Moms Group. Moms Group, I mean, what a thing. So much happens. You don't even have to engage sometimes, and you still, I look forward to it. I'm like, 17 new messages. I sent it to them, and I'm telling everyone else too. And of course, thank you for coming on the show.
Oh, you're so welcome, and thank you for having me.
It's been so nice to meet you. I'm feeling very inspired to go off and read some more books now.
I should say we also have a sleeping baby.
Yay. That's what you want.
Time to read.
Yeah, quick.
That's all for this episode. You can sign up for Crib Notes at tinyletter.com/cribnotes. And you can find Elizabeth on Twitter at Elizabeth Moya. That's Moya.
On our next book club show, we'll be discussing Lanny by Max Porter. It's a lyrical, inventive exploration of life in a small English village and a young boy who disappears. And it's the latest book read by my book club. It's been critically acclaimed, but did it make for good discussion? Listen in to find out. But before that, we've got a new bookshelf coming your way. That's our show in which we talk about the books we're reading outside of book club, the ones that we get to pick and choose. And in this case, it's the books that are getting us through the current corona crisis. And an interview with a book club based in the London Metropolitan Archive. They read books about London with the added bonus of original historical materials for their members to look at. It's thanks to a tip from them that I recently read Neverwhere by Neil Gaiman, which I highly recommend as a fantastic page turner if you're looking for something to take your mind off current world events. Listen out for those shows, which are coming soon.
And if you missed it, do check out our most recent episode on a brilliant sci-fi collection, Stories of Your Life and Others by Ted Chiang. You may not have heard of him, but to those in the know, who now include us, he's a must-read.
If you'd like to see what we're up to between episodes, follow us on Instagram or Facebook at Book Club Review Podcast, on Twitter at Book Club RVW Pod, or email thebookclubreview@gmail.com. And if you're not already, why not subscribe to us on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. If you like what we do, please take a moment to rate, review and subscribe to us. It helps other listeners find us and means you'll never miss an episode.
But for now, thanks for listening and happy reading.